She was promised to God, but destiny wanted to see how far a promise could bleed before it broke. She fell into sin, and even when life offered her grace, she chose betrayal again. And when the promise finally shattered, she didn't stop there. She betrayed everything that had ever believed in her. Her faith, her family, and the man who loved her enough to forgive. Even when life gave her a second chance, she turned it into another wound. That single line had followed Elara Vallens since the day she was born. Every daughter in Vallens' family carried the same weight. The Vallens legacy, each girl raised to, surrender her name to, the church the moment she came of age. Love, laughter, the right to choose, all signed away in parchment and prayer. Elara was meant to be the seventh Vallens sister. Her future had been decided before she even learned to spell her name. But she was never good at silence. She heard the world too loudly to call it sin. When she was 19, the church sent her to St. Helena University to finish a religious arts program, a polished compromise between faith and modernity. She arrived in a grey habit and white veil, carrying books like weapons of obedience. And then she met him. Aaron Miller was everything the sermons warned her against. Laughing too loudly, asking too many questions, looking at her as if the veil was a door. The first time he spoke, her pulse forgot its discipline. "I thought the Vallens girls were angels," he said. "Only the ones who never look back," she replied. "But you just did." He was charm, and chaos in equal measure. A future CEO, masquerading as a dreamer. She was order wrapped in temptation's uniform. The universe laughed and brought them face to face for one more test. At first it was innocent study sessions in the library, notes passed inside antique Bibles, his hand accidentally brushing hers. But sin has a way of sounding like a confession you want to hear again. Within weeks, their meetings became short sparks in long hours of obedience. For the first time, she understood that faith and feeling can bleed the same color. At home, her mother reminded her of the oath. "Every Vallens daughter belongs to heaven, Elara. We are born to pray, not to choose." "But what if God chose wrong?" she whispered when no one was listening. Her answer came in the most human way possible, a message from Aaron. Meet me by the north gate before the bells. She should have deleted it. Instead she memorized it like scripture. That night rain fell softly over St. Helena. She slipped through the arched hall in a grey coat thrown over her habit. Aaron was waiting beneath a flickering street lamp, his smile half fear and half faith. When she reached him, he didn't speak. He just held out his hand. Elara looked at it like a mirror to her life. One side safe, the other alive. And then she took it. For a moment the world forgot to judge. Rain washed away the word sister, leaving only her name. She let her head rest on his shoulder. Two worlds, faith and desire, finally touched and neither burned. That every Vallens promise bears a price. By the next moonrise, someone would see them together and the legacy would crack. What began as one moment of love would become the sin that rewrote generations. Elara Vallens woke with the taste of rain and guilt on her lips. The sun had risen, but inside her room at the convent everything felt darker than before. She touched the cross around her neck and flinched as if it burned. For days she avoided Aaron's calls. But temptation has a voice that doesn't need a phone. At night she heard it in the echo of stairs, in the low hum of the city beyond the walls. A rhythm that sounded like his name. When they met again, weeks later, her hands shook. Aaron studied her face, then laughed softly. "Aaron, so this is what heaven does to its favorites. turns them into ghosts. Elara, maybe I am one. Aaron, then let me be the sin that makes you breathe again. She should have walked away. Instead, she fell closer. And with every breath, the distance between God and desire became smaller. News spreads fast in the Vallens family. A letter arrived without a signature. Your daughter has left the path. The next evening, her mother appeared at the convent, grief wrapped in dignity. Mother Vallens, you know what we've given up for our name. You're not just my child. You're the legacy of our salvation. Why throw it away for a boy? Elara, it was never for a boy. It was for a moment where I felt alive. Mother, life isn't about feeling. It's about faith. Elara, maybe faith forgot how to feel. Those words would become a curse. Her mother left without a blessing, a gesture that had never happened in any generation of their line. After that night, Elara and Aaron lived like exiles of their own story. She moved into the tiny flat he rented near the river. For a while it felt like freedom. No bells, no vows, no eyes watching. But freedom without peace is just a quieter kind of punishment. She started losing sleep. Whispers turned to nausea and then to truth. She was carrying Aaron's child. The moment she told him, he went silent. Not because he didn't want it, but because he understood what it would cost. Aaron, we'll keep the baby. We'll start over. Elara, start over where? Faith doesn't move house that easily. Aaron, then neither will we. He kept his promise. He stood by her when the church refused to. The papers called their marriage a scandal. The Vallens family called it a death. But for a year they survived on each other's stubborn hope. When their son was born, Aaron said, "He has your eyes. Maybe even heaven forgives itself through children." Elara looked down at the baby and thought, for the first time in months, that God might still be listening. But peace was a fragile guest. The more they tried to build a life, the more it felt like they were borrowing time from a storm. It came quietly, first as shame, then desperation. The Vallens' name was falling apart. Aaron was gone, and Elara carried more than guilt. Now she carried life itself. Her mother, pale and trembling, visited the house one night. The candlelight flickered across her face. Even her shadow looked older. Mother Vallens. Elara, the world has no forgiveness for women who fall. But a mother must ask for mercy, even if she has to beg for it. With those words, she left her daughter's house and went straight to her oldest friend, Margaret Hayes. They had once sung together in the church choir before the world divided them into sinner and saint. When Margaret saw her standing at the gate, drenched and shaking, she understood without questions. "Margaret, tell me what you need." "Mother Vallens, my child has sinned, and she will soon have a child of her own." "You have a son, Margaret. A good man. Convince him please to give her a name, a shield." Margaret hesitated. "Ryan won't agree. He believes vow and virtue can't be borrowed." "Then tell him this," Elara's mother whispered, voice breaking. "One day he may have a daughter too. Will he cast her out if she ever chooses wrong?" Ryan Hayes heard his mother weeping through the door long before she came in. When she told him the story, he reacted with disbelief. Ryan. I won't build a home on another man's ruin. Margaret. She needs redemption, not pity. And you. Maybe you need grace more than judgment. Days passed in silence until Ryan rode out to the Vallens' cottage himself. He found Elara sitting on the porch, her belly heavy, her eyes hollow yet defiant. She looked up. "You've come to see a warning, not a woman," he answered gently. "I came to see if forgiveness looks as fragile as people say. That sentence would change both their lives." He offered not romance, but rescue. "I will marry you," he said quietly, "but only if you promise this, to never betray yourself again." She nodded, tears falling slow. "I promise to try." Their wedding was held at dawn. No guests, no vows of grandeur, just a simple cross, a trembling bride, and a man who believed salvation could be lived, not preached. Months later, their first son was born. Healthy and bright-eyed, Ryan held him with awe. "You see," he said softly, "God still lends light to the broken." Elara smiled for the first time since her sin. Maybe heaven had forgiven her through a child's cry. Years passed, and the burden turned into comfort. Business began to grow like morning sunlight on stone. Ryan's intelligence and her quiet strength built an empire no prayer could have promised. Their second boy came into the world on a calm spring afternoon, golden-haired, his laughter filling every empty room. They built a home filled with books, white curtains, and evenings scented with jasmine. To everyone else, they were the image of grace reclaimed. But sometimes, when the wind brushed the window, Elara would remember another laughter one that never came home. She would close her eyes, whispering, "Forgive me, Ryan, for borrowing peace from a storm." Outside, her husband worked late in his study, flawless in his suit, confident and calm. Inside, she rocked both sons to sleep, praying that the past would finally tire of chasing her. Yet in the quiet rhythm of the house, she sometimes thought she heard footsteps, just beyond the gate, old sins wandering, still looking for their name. Ryan never heard those footsteps. He heard progress instead. The voices of clients, meetings, and building plans that filled their mornings with purpose. Elara watched him from the balcony, admiring how confidently he wore certainty while she still carried doubt. One evening, when the first boy had fallen asleep and the world turned serene with spring rain, Ryan looked up from his papers and said, "I miss your voice. You talk less these days." She smiled softly. "I used up too many words in prayers that weren't answered." He rose, crossed the room, and placed his hands around hers. "Then save a few for me. I listen." It was the first time in years she let someone's silence touch her without fear. The light from the fireplace painted their faces in gold and rust, and the rain against the windows beat slowly, like a heart remembering how to breathe. The night didn't ask for permission. It simply closed the distance between them until faith and forgiveness looked like the same thing. Morning was gentle and new, and for the first time since her Vallens years, Elara woke without regret. Weeks later, she learned that their quiet night had planted another beginning inside her. When she told Ryan, he stood wordless for a moment before smiling, as though destiny had finally cleared an old debt. "We'll call him a miracle," he said. She already believed. One too many in her past, this one belongs to us. Her pregnancy brought new life to the house. Margaret came often, bringing flowers and stories of childhood to keep the air light. Even the first boy grew excited, pressing his ear against her stomach to hear the heartbeat. That sounded like a promise, steady and forgiving. On a bright summer morning, their second child was born, and the doctor said both mother and son were safe. Outside, the garden was in bloom, sunlight moving through the open curtains like a blessing. Ryan held the baby in his arms and whispered, "2 boys and a love strong enough to outgrow its own sins." For months after, the house echoed with children's laughter, the shuffle of Ryan's shoes, the soft hum of Elara's song as she worked in the studio at twilight. It looked like the picture of peace that heaven keeps framed to convince itself redemption works. But at night, all pictures tremble. Sometimes she would wake to the sound of rain, heavier than before, and remember a younger voice promising, "I'll stand by you, no matter what it costs." Then she'd reach out in the dark, touch Ryan's hand, and hold it a little tighter, as if fear could be kept away by warmth alone. The world outside kept smiling at the Hayes family. Investors praised Ryan. Neighbors envied their perfect home. No one saw the way Elara sometimes stood at the window when thunder rolled, whispering a prayer with no name. Because old sins don't die in storms. They rest and wait for the next sunrise to return. Years passed like pages in a book too beautiful to close. Ryan's business had risen from dream to empire. Elara glowed beside him, elegant and content. Their sons were the proof that grace could grow out of sin, or so they believed. The house was filled with music, laughter, the gentle measure of a life redeemed. Then came the evening that changed everything. Ryan sat by the dining table, reviewing some family papers. Elara was setting the plates when he spoke without looking up, his voice at ease. "Ryan, our eldest is 22 now. Margaret's niece has a daughter, a good family, honest people. They're not wealthy, but they raise children with faith. I think he would be happy with her." The clatter of silverware broke the moment. "Elara, you mean to marry our son into that house?" Ryan, "Yes. They're old connections. And good people, Elara. They're beneath our standard." Ryan, frowning, "Standard? They're honest. That should be enough." Elara, "It is not. We've worked too hard to return to where we started." Her words hung in the air like ash. Ryan tried persuasion first, kindness, then reason, then anger tempered with hope. She refused each one. Finally, he slammed a hand on the table, his calm cracking. "Ryan, these are my children. Elara, their fate is as much mine to decide as yours." Elara turned slowly, a smile that cut more than any shout. "Elara, your children?" Her voice dropped, soft as poison. "Then maybe you should first ask the truth. Are they really yours?" Silence split the room open. The gram clock on the wall laughed with each ticking second. Ryan stared at her, eyes wide, heart torn between disbelief and terror. "Ryan, what did you say?" But Elara had already turned away, shaking, realizing what the moment had done. Later that night, she tried to apologize. He didn't listen. He walked out into the storm and drove to the hospital, the wind tearing through his thoughts. At the testing lab, he handed over samples, his signature barely legible. Days later, the report arrived. 2 lines that ended a life. No paternal match detected. He read it, again and again until the letters blurred into lightning. 23 years of faith collapsed into one breath. He remembered every storm she had promised to bury, every sin rebranded as redemption, and realized they were never his sons, never his peace. When he came home that evening, Elara ran to him, face pale. "I went too far," she said. "I was angry, just words, Ryan, nothing true." He held up the papers. One truth was enough. She fell to her knees. "Please, forgive me," He looked at her like a man looking through time itself. I gave you forgiveness the day I married you. You killed it yourself. No one knows what happened next. Only that the neighbors heard a shout, a single gunshot, and then nothing. When the police arrived, Ryan was sitting beside Elara's body, gun on the floor, tears on his face. He said only one sentence before they took him away. She was the only promise I kept, and the only one that killed me. Prison walls don't echo prayers, just regret. Inside that bare cell, Ryan Hayes sat in silence, waiting for a guard to open the door for his lawyer. They arrived at dawn with papers and a camera to record his final statement. He looked up, pale but steady. Ryan, you want truth? Fine. The tests say they're not my blood. Maybe that's true. But everything they own, the house, the business, this name was built with my love. And love doesn't need proofs. He paused, hands trembling. My sons will hear this someday. Tell them I was wrong in every holy way, but never in loving them. The promise broke in blood, but maybe they will rebuild it in grace. The guard wiped his eyes when he signed the paper that transferred his estate to both boys. Outside, reporters scribbled headings. Vallens' legacy redeemed by confession. That night Ryan lay down on the thin mattress. The warden found him at sunrise, still and peaceful, his hand over his heart as if he were trying to hold it together one last time. He had died of a massive heart attack. The doctors called it stress. The guards called it remorse. When the news reached home, the city went silent. For the first time in years, both brothers stood side by side without their shadows between them. The funeral was small. Ethan folded his mother's scarf around the urn. Noah read a verse from Revelation. He will wipe away every tear. That night, Ethan opened the sealed documents from the lawyer. Ryan's voice was printed in ink and pain. I built everything on faith and mistake. Now build the rest on truth. What's mine is yours. Not because you earned it, but because you forgave me without knowing why. From that moment, they decided to live the way he never could. Months later, Ethan stood in the same church where his father once planned to marry him off. Now he stood there on his own terms, hand in hand with the same girl their father had chosen. The air was filled with candles and a gentleness no camera could catch. No more wars in this family, he whispered as vows were spoken. Her name was Clara Moore, the woman their father once called a soul without greed, stood beside Ethan as if forgiveness had finally taken a shape. Noah pulled his brother into a tight embrace and whispered, "Congratulations, Ethan, for finishing what father began." Meanwhile, Noah began his own construction, not of business, but of mercy. 5 acres outside the city, he built a foundation that held both a hospital and a home for orphans. Its sign read, "The Elara and Ryan Hayes Center for Grace." The walls were white, the windows open, and the first children to enter laughed as if heaven had forgotten to lock the door. As evening settled, Ethan and Noah visited their parents' graves. 2 roses fell on the stone, red for love, white for forgiveness. Ethan looked up at the sky and said, half a smile through tears, "Father, it broke you, but you fixed us." And under the fading light, the Vallens' name finally found its rest, not in blood, but in grace. Years passed without scandal or sorrow. People spoke of the Hayes brothers as proof that curses could end if someone had the courage to rewrite them. Ethan managed the business with the same balance their father once dreamed of, and Noah continued to expand the foundation that bore their parents' names. The new building of the Elara and Ryan Hayes Center stood beside a chapel where bells rang 5 times a day, not for penance but for gratitude. Children filled the courtyard, running across tiles engraved with a single line: "Love is not what saves us. It is how we save each other." Noah met Dr. Isabella Lane 3 years after the foundation was built. She'd come to volunteer for a summer, a woman of quiet faith and strong hands who believed that helping the living was also a kind of prayer. She was younger than him, but spoke with a wisdom that felt ancient. "Isabella, your mother's story changed the way I see forgiveness." Noah, she was the kind who could find God in a broken song. Isabella, and what about you? Noah, I keep trying to finish her song. They married without spectacle under the same church arch where Ethan once stood. The city's papers wrote a single column about it, calling it the final piece of the Vallens legacy. At the reception, Ethan hugged his brother tightly. "You gave Mother's name a home again. Maybe this was what Father meant by grace." Noah smiled. "She carried faith until it broke. I carry what's left." Their wives, Clara and Isabella, stood together, their laugh soft and steady like the house their husbands had rebuilt from ashes. Behind them, sunlight filtered through the old Vallens window, casting 7 colors on the floor for the 7 daughters their ancestors once gave to the church. A new generation of grace had taken their place. In his studio, Noah began painting a mural for the children's hall. It showed a woman in gray holding a lantern over a boy, and a man standing side by side. Under it, he painted one sentence from their father's letter: "Build your home on truth, and let forgiveness be its roof." When Isabella asked why he chose those words, he answered, because they were his apology, and her prayer wrapped in the same breath. Every year on the anniversary of their parents' death, the bells of the center ring, once for each vow broken and twice for each healed. The brothers stand in the garden while children throw rose petals in the air. Forgiveness floats like flower dust around them. Ethan turns to Noah. "Father used to say promises don't die, they wait. Do you think I'll still wait for something?" Noah answers, looking at the sky. "Maybe for us to stop waiting and start living." As the camera of memory pulls back, the Vallens estate lies quiet under evening light. No guns, no scars, just 2 families, one name, and a peace that finally learned to stay. Weeks after Noah and Isabella's wedding, the house of Hayes was quiet again, until a new laugh lightened its halls. Clara had been to so many doctors that hope had begun to sound like a myth. Each time they said the same, a little late perhaps, pray and wait. And then one morning, waiting ended. She told Ethan with tears on her cheeks, and the world around them changed temperature. Every room in the estate felt alive again. That night, as he walked into their room, Ethan placed his hand on her shoulder and said softly, "I wish for a daughter just like you." Clara smiled through happy tears. "And I pray for a son just like you." They laughed, and for a moment it seemed the past had finally forgiven their name. The lights dimmed. Outside, the wind carried petals from the garden, rising like blessings. No one knew what the future would bring, whether the next child would be another Elara born to test faith and fate again, or perhaps an Ethan reborn who'd never know the weight of his father's sins. All they knew was that life was ready to begin its circle once more, and destiny, smiling in the dark, was already picking up a new pen.